In our last video, we created a custom report using the Bold Reports Designer. We could use the Bold Reports viewer to display the reports, but that doesn't always fit with what you want to accomplish. That is why today we're going to implement a report viewer in a Blazor Server application. That way, we can show our custom reports to our clients directly inside of our site instead of sending them to a separate application. Now, this video has been sponsored by Syncfusion. I cover the details of the sponsorship in the Intro to Syncfusion video, as well as how to get the Syncfusion controls for free. I would encourage you to check out that video. If you haven't yet downloaded the controls, or if you want more information about Syncfusion, I'd appreciate it if you use the link in the description. That will let Syncfusion know that people are interested in their products because of this sponsorship, which will encourage them to continue sponsoring community content. Okay, let's start off in Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. We're going to create a Blazor Server app. We're not going to start with anything special, no Syncfusion templates, just a simple Blazor Server app. I'm going to call this Report Demo and Report Demo App, and we'll save this in the temp folder. And .NET 6, no authentication, yes to HTTPS. Now, once this gets created, we will just do a couple of quick things to note that this is the .NET 6 layout. So you're going to see the one file instead of this and the other file, but everything's here now. I have a video on what .NET 6 changed versus .NET 5 and before, so you can look that over. But in dependencies, we're going to right click. We're going to say Manage NuGet Packages, and we're going to add 3 NuGet packages. The first one is Bold Reports.net.core. So this is the actual reporting engine we're going to for viewing reports. So we're going to install that. The latest stable version is 4.1.78 as of the recording of this video. We'll install that, hit OK, and I accept. Next up, we're going to make sure that Microsoft, if I spell it right, ASP.NetCore.MVC.NewtonSoft JSON. This is the original JSON system for working with JSON files. We do have a newer version, but it doesn't have all the features. And with Syncfusion, they like to use the NewtonSoft version. So go ahead and install this. Hit OK, and I accept. And finally, we're going to install system.data.sql. And this is because our report uses SQL Server. So if your report does not use SQL Server, you don't need this. But since ours does, it needs to be able to communicate to SQL. Remember that from the last video, the report is just an XML file. And one of the things in there is where to find the data. And so it's just a connection string. So the application is going to have to execute that connection string and talk to the data. That's why we need the SQL client installed. Okay, now we're also going to be putting an API controller right in our Blazor Server app. Now, this does mean we should probably talk about the fact that Blazor Server is just an ASP.NET Core web application. There's also API, MVC, Razor Pages. These are all just ASP.NET Core web applications at their heart. And what we do is we use the base web application and we add our own pieces. So for instance, we have the Map Blazor Hub. This and also the Add Server-Side Blazor. These two things are what add the Blazor stuff to ASP.NET Core. But we can also add our own things as well. So for instance, we can come down here and above where it says app.map.blazor hub, we can say app.map controllers. And what this will do is it will enable MVC and API to be used inside of our ASP.NET Core application, in this case, our Blazor Server app. This will allow us to use API 2. So don't think of this as two separate applications, it's one. It's just that we're adding in the features that we want to enable. Okay, so why do we have to have an API? Well, the API is what will actually serve the report. It's what's going to process the report, and it's going to make sure we cache the report in memory so that it doesn't keep getting called over and over again, and so on. So just know that's why we have to have the API. That's how it works, is we're going to call the API from our page. Speaking of pages, let's clean up a couple of things here. Let's get rid of report demo.data. Let's get rid of the sample weather forecast service. Let's actually delete this entire data folder. And then let's go to the pages, and we're going to delete the fetch data page. Basically getting rid of the excess boilerplate stuff, the demo stuff that comes with the Blazor Server app. Now, the last thing is we'll modify the nav menu, but in just a minute. First, we're going to add a page, and we're going to say Razor Components, which is a Blazor Server page. And we're going to say, let's just call this Report Viewer. All right, and we're going to give it a path. So at page report viewer, which means that we can then just copy that, go over the nav menu, and where we right now have fetch data, we're going to replace that with report viewer. I'll leave the icon the same, but we'll say report viewer. That way we can see that report right away. And if we run this application, it should build. And if it does, then we'll see our link to the page, which just doesn't really have anything yet, but that's okay. All right, here we go. So you have the counter is still there. We left it there. But the report viewer. And there we go. There is the start of our report page. Okay, so we're set up to start, but we still have a ways to go. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is open up www.root. And in here, I want to create a couple of things. First, I'm going to create a folder for reports. Now, if you're not familiar with the www.root folder, it's a special folder inside of our ASP.NET Core apps. And what it does is it's going to copy over to the root of our website. Everything is in here. We don't have to mark it anything special. We're just going to copy everything over, which means that if I open up my temp directory, remember that file there, I can copy this and I can paste it in here. And now I have my sample people report.rdl file inside of my project. We can then reference that later. All right, so there's one folder. The other folder is going to be scripts. We are going to deal with JavaScript in this video. So scripts. And in here, we're going to create one JavaScript script. And this is a pretty boilerplate script. So you can pretty much copy and paste this from app to app whenever you need a report viewer in your app. So let's go to add. And we're going to say new item. We'll search for JavaScript. And let's choose a JavaScript file. I know it says Visual C#, it's weird, but it's just a C#, JavaScript file. And we're going to name this, let's name it bold reports -interop. And it's an empty JavaScript file. If you don't know JavaScript, again, this is pretty much boilerplate. I would encourage you to at least understand JavaScript if you're working the web. Not a framework library at first. Just learn vanilla JavaScript. It's pretty important when dealing with the web to at least know the basics. So we're going to say window.bold reports. What this does is it adds this to the window object, which will allow us to call it from other places. In this case, we're going to call it from our Blazor Server app. Equals, and we start the curly braces on the same line. Again, we are conforming to JavaScript standards now, not C# standards. Don't try and make the two look the same. That's a mistake. Render viewer. It's a function. We're going to pass in element ID, report, viewer, options. And then inside of here, we're going to say, and it's going to use some jQuery, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they say it's a requirement to have jQuery. If this is the only thing that was using jQuery, we could just use a simple selector and not have to use the jQuery selector. But since we have jQuery, we're going to use the jQuery selector. So we're looking for, if you pass in the element ID, the name of it, then it's going to look for that ID on the page. All right, we're going to say bold report viewer. And then inside here, report path is going to be report viewer options dot report name, and report service URL is going to be report viewer options dot service URL. Okay, how do I know this? Well, because I went through and read the documentation. Pretty much that's it. This right here, what we're doing is we're adding a new function to the window object. So bold reports dot render viewer. And the render viewer function, what it's going to do is it's going to look for whatever element ID you pass in, look for the ID on the web page. So any element, any HTML element that has an ID, which is supposed to be unique, it's going to look for the specific ID we pass in, which is going to be our report viewer ID. It's going to find that, and it's going to attach this, and it's going to pass in these two values. The two values we're going to find off of this object, the report path and the report service URL. So we'll see more about this in the future, but again, unless you change names on things, this is boilerplate stuff. This is stuff you can copy from one project to the other. Just copy the whole scripts folder and plunk it in a new location. All right. Now, next up, I'm not big on copy and paste, but I'm going to copy and paste, in this case, the layout page. So let me go ahead and copy that off screen, and then I'll paste it and we'll talk about it. And you'll see why in a minute why I'm not a big fan of copy paste, but I'm going to. So in the underscore layout page, we need, let's do it above the server pre-rendered head outlet and below everything else. We're going to paste a bunch of scripts. And again, normally scripts go at the end of the body, but because of the fact they're required for rendering the page, we're going to put them up in the head. Now, I don't want you to freak out when I paste this. We're going to talk through it. That's a lot. And yes, you can copy and paste this. And I would encourage you to, because this is ridiculous to try and type out yourself. I do wish there was an easier way of doing this. I have not found it yet. If you find it, I would love for you to leave a comment down below and let me know how you found to do this and so on. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Normally I don't do this because it makes the font small, but I think it's important to see this. Let's try 80%. All right, so first up, everything here is a CDN link, except for this bottom one. We'll talk about that in a minute. But everything is a CDN link. We've talked about this before in previous, in the PDF viewer video, where we're talking to a content delivery network and saying, give me this file, which means that we don't have to host it ourselves. We don't have to worry about the bandwidth ourselves. That's somebody else's problem. But it also means that we don't have to make sure that we have the right version for everything. We just point to it. And later on, we can change the version by just changing the number in the URL. So the first one is the styling for the bold report. which technically, let's do some moving around here. We should move these around. Let's move these two right here. We're going to cut these out here. I could have moved them manually, but we're going to just copy and paste or cut and paste. There we go. And the reason I move these down below, like we talked about these before, but site.css and reportdemo.styles.css, they should be below the any changes, any other like boilerplate CSS. Otherwise, this could override my styles. I don't want that. I want my styles to override this. So this is the material report style. You can look at that if you want. This right here is jQuery. Now, like I said before, I don't know why they need jQuery. They say that jQuery is required in order to display reports. I'm hoping it's not for just that one selector. This right here, this $ indicates they're using jQuery. If that's all it is, that's a simple replacement. You don't need to do this anymore. This used to be the way I do things, but it isn't needed because basic or vanilla JavaScript just means JavaScript without any extra stuff. Vanilla JavaScript has a very powerful selector already built in. We don't need to use jQuery. But if you're already using jQuery, using this isn't harming anything. So it's a matter of, they say it's necessary, so we include it. All right. Next up, these sections, I've left the comments on. These are from the documentation. So you can go to the documentation and just copy and paste. Or you can download my source code and copy and paste. Now, obviously, as the versions change, you'd have to change these numbers. Notice it says 4.1.78, which was the version of the package that we installed right here, 4.1.78, that boldreports.net.core. So these packages relate to that, but notice it says used to render gauge items. Add these scripts only if your report contains gauge report items. Now, if you're going to display multiple reports, you're probably going to have to add these no matter what, because of the fact that you might not know if the report includes, if every report or any of the reports contains gauges. So that's kind of a bummer. But if you don't include gauges in any of them, then you can get rid of this whole section and all these scripts. So this is for mapping. So if you have maps in your reports, you have to include this. If not, you don't. This is for the viewer components. You need to have these. So this is the common and the widgets. And this is for chart items. Only if you have charts would you need to include these things. Well, ours does have a chart, so we need to include these too. But it's up to you what things you need. So you might only need this one, these two, and these two. But if you have charts, you need 2 more. If you have a map, you have 1 more. If you have gauges, you have 6 more. So do that information as you will, but they're all here in case you need them. Now, I would encourage you to figure out what you need and only include what you need, because downloading extra stuff, not great, but downloading the stuff you need, important. So therefore, figure out what the right balance is for your organization. Okay, with that, the last thing here that I pasted in is this line right here. This refers to the scripts folder, boldreports-interop.js. That sound familiar? That's this file. So we have to include this as well. This is what allows us to call the bold reports and stick it on the page, essentially. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. And I hate copying and pasting, but as you can see, there's no reason for me to type this out. That's ridiculous. You're going to copy and paste it, so I did. Okay, I think that's the biggest, just copy and paste this. So let's go on to creating, let's create our model first. We're going to have a model which is going to have these 2 pieces of information, port path and service URL, or port name, I'm sorry, and service URL. So let's create a new folder. So add new folder, we're going to call it models. And in here, we're going to create a new class. And this is just a C# class. We're going to call it report options. And I'm preferring the file scope namespace, so I'm going to change over to that. And we'll say prop string report name and prop string service URL. Now, that matches exactly, where are we here? Here, report name and service URL. The only difference is the fact that the lowercase r and the lowercase s, that's because in JavaScript, that's the convention, which you may say, well, then how do you get the conversion since we need to know how to convert this over? That's taken care of for us by default in the conversion from C# over to JavaScript. There is a setting you can turn that off, but by default, it converts our model objects over to JSON or JavaScript style model objects on the client. Okay, yes, lots of stuff going on. And if you're not familiar with the web, it can be a little confusing, but hang with me. All right, let's close all this down because there's just a lot of stuff that we don't need to see right now. Okay, next up, what we're going to do is we're going to add our report controller. So let's add a new folder called API. That way we know stuff inside APIs. Let's go with just API. And then inside here, we're going to add just a class. We could add a controller, but we're going to change so much in it. I would prefer us to create a class. And we're going to create a class. We're going to call it report controller. All right, we're going to change over to the file scope namespaces. And we are going to add, let's go up to here, we're adding a using statement. Using Microsoft.extensions.caching.memory. Now, this API is pretty close to a copy paste. It's not quite a copy paste, but it's pretty close to a copy paste. And so you don't have to know or memorize all this stuff. You just need to know what's going on and why. It's using caching in here to make calling a report less intense on the server. Okay, now we do need to decorate this with route. We can, oops, don't need that. Just a route, and then we're going to give it a route path. So first of all, we're going to say API. So if you go to our website, this Blazor Server page, it runs on localhost and then a port number. So localhost 7213, whatever. But if we want to call an API controller, we want to say localhost :5712 or whatever it was /API, because that way we differentiate from the regular path. So API, and then we're going to give it the controller, and then we're going to say action, and then the ID, which is optional. So this is the path that's needed. Not sure why it's yelling at me. Oh. There we go. So we have to inherit from controller base. So this is the path that it's going to use to call this API. Again, this is pretty standard stuff. The one thing that's not standard, and I've heard there is a fix coming for this, but typically in API, you would say API controller, like this. For this, you should not say this, at least not for now. And the reason why is because it makes the images not render. And yes, this was a head scratcher trying to figure out what was going on with the rendering. There's a bug in here where if you say API controller, it will not properly render the images. Everything else is fine. And if you export to a PDF, which we'll see how to do, then the image is there. It's just not on the viewer itself. The fix is just take off the API controller tag on there, and it still all works. It just fixes the issue. Okay, again, that the fix for that, so you can still have API controller on it, is coming. All right. We also want to inherit from iReport controller. All right. We need to use the using boldreports.web.report viewer. Okay. So that takes care of this. Of course, we haven't implemented this yet. Let's go ahead and implement. Control dot implement interface. I love this. There's your stuff. Now just fill it in. Okay. The throw new not implement exception just makes sure we know that, yeah, we need to do something here. So let's start doing this. This is all from the documentation. So we're not going to deviate too far from it, but we do need to understand what's going on, at least at a high level. Private read only. Let's call it cache, not memory cache. All right. And then we're also going to say we need private read only, not an iLogger, iWeb host environment. Or I say host or hosting environment. Okay. And then we're going to need to grab or put those in the controllers, or constructor. All right. So I did a control dot here and said, hey, put that into the constructor just by doing control dot on the item. And we could do something similar here, add parameter to report controller. Like that. Now it's done. So the first one generated this constructor. The second one just added a parameter to that constructor. So now we're getting both of those from our dependency injection. So this provides for us the caching ability, so we can cache a report. And this one allows us to get information about our hosting environment, which we'll see in just a minute. Now let's go on to the get resource. We need a few different methods here that we've implemented based upon the interface. The first one's get resource. We're going to say action name get resource. Now, this API is not following traditional REST, and that's okay. That's why we're having to decorate everything as we are. You can modify this if you wanted to be a little ambitious, but we're going to stick with the defaults of how they went about creating this API controller. Accept verbs, get. So it's saying if you ask for get resource, so controller, which is, it's the report controller, then action name is get resource. And then if you have any information to pass along, that comes next. So in this case, get resource, we're going to pass in an object called the report resource. And what we're going to do is we're going to return report helper. That comes from bold reports. Get resource, pass in the resource, pass in this and the cache. All right, so we're passing in this particular instance, we're passing in the resource that we're looking for, and we're passing in the cache, so you can look that up. All right, now you may say, where did this report helper come from? If you hit F12, you can go right to it. Wait for it. There we go. Get resource. This is part of boldreports.web.report viewer. This is from Syncfusion. All right. So get report, was it? Get resource. Sorry. There we go. You can expand this and read more about what it's doing. And then you can also expand the code and read the code. So really nice. They included that so you can actually follow what it's doing and how it's doing it. All right, so there is the first entry. Next up is the on init reporting options. And we're going to say this is a non-action, meaning don't call us directly, not as an API endpoint. All right, string base path equals, this is where the hosting environment comes in, web root path. This is the root of our website. So we need to know that first. And then we're going to say, let me see on my screen here, it's my other screen is what I'm reading off of, and it's a little long. So there we go. All right. So the next line is file stream. Input stream equals new base path plus, and then our string literal, we're going to say /reports/ So the base path of our site, which by the way is www root. So localhost is going to start at the www root level, which means then /reports would take you into this folder, this reports folder, which would allow you then to get to the particular report. So we're going to say plus report option dot report model dot report path, which is going to be the path to this. It's going to say sample people report. That's what report path is going to say, which means we need to say plus, and let me unpin this here so you can see it, plus .rdl. We're not going to ask the user to give us .rdl, just say sample people report. And then we'll put the .rdl at the end. Put a comma and go to the next line because this is, like I said, long. File mode is open and file access is .read. So that's the end of the command. So what we're saying is I want a file stream, so an input stream of type file stream. The file you want to open is this RDL file, whichever one it is. We're going to open it in read mode. So that's what we're going to do first. Next up, we're going to say memory stream. Memory stream, report stream equals new input stream dot copy to report stream. So this file stream right here, we're going to copy it to a memory stream. Report stream dot position, so start at 0. And then input stream dot close. And then report option dot report model dot stream equals report stream. So we're passing in a model here, the report viewer options. If we look at that, we have a few things in here, but one of them is the report model. If we open this report model up, we'll see that actually it's a report viewer model type. Hit F12 on that to go to it, and we'll see a few things in here, but one of them is the stream. So what we're saying is we get the report name, we look that up, and we load up the stream of the report. So grab the report, put it in memory, and put that back into this object. So remember that with objects, with reference type objects in C#, like a class, when we pass them around, we don't pass around and make a copy of the object. We're passing around the reference to the object, which means that we can update that object like we are right here, and the caller will have access to that updated information because of the fact we're both pointing to the same location. So we don't have to return anything here. We just need to update this report option with the stream of our report. Okay. Next up, on report loaded, we're not going to do anything with, so we're going to say non-action and just delete out the throw. Next up, we have 2 posts. So we'll just mark them both as HTTP post. Both of them. And then the first one, we're going to say return report helper dot process report null this and cache. So we're going to say, hey, process this report, and there's no information, no additional settings to that report. That's the settings are first. And then we're saying this object right here, this instance, and then here's a cache as well. So process this report, which we have looked at before, but if we hit F12, we can go there. There's process reports. If we, let's see if we can expand this. Nope, you have to go to the other side, sorry. Oh, yep, it expanded. There you go. So this is what's actually happening to that report, how it's being processed. And there's further step, hit F12, and you go to that location, and then open that up, and here's what's happening next. Notice it's working the RDL file and so on. So this is how the report actually gets processed if you're interested in going down that rabbit hole. The code is all there. Now, this next command, the post report action again, notice the only difference is this JSON result dictionary. I'm going to paste the same line as up above. This time instead of null, I'm going to put the JSON array in. And the reason why we're doing this is because these are the settings, the tweaks to the report that may happen. So if you don't have any tweaks, then this is what we're going to call. If you have some tweaks, this is what you call. So it's just a matter of if you're passing in those tweaks or not, whether or not you get that call. So that's the API. Yes, it's confusing, and we've done it at a high level, went over what's happening and why. And you may say, well, I kind of understand, but I couldn't write that myself. And that's okay. If you understand and at least know, okay, I see what's happening here, but I couldn't write it myself, that's okay because you already have it written. And this really shouldn't change that much, if at all. Now, I encourage you to learn more about it and go deeper with it. But to start off, you can get into it knowing that this, you know what it does. And if it broke, you could probably tweak it and play with it and try and get it to work. But you don't have to write it from scratch and know everything about how to build it in the first place because the work's already been done. So that is the API. That was kind of like the complex part. The API, the interop file, and putting all those settings into our layout.cs HTML. So let's go to the report viewer and let's talk about how to render this page. Let's start off with a few usings. Using Microsoft.js Interop. This will allow us to talk to JavaScript from Blazor Server. If you haven't done this yet, this is a great time to learn. We're going to talk to JavaScript in order to make one call, and that call is to this right here. So we're going to call this from our Blazor Server page. Using Microsoft.ASP.NET And finally, using, and this is the, what's this application called? Report demo? Report demo dot models. Okay. We also need to inject. This uses dependency injection, IJS runtime. This is the actual JavaScript runtime. We'll call it JS runtime. This allows us to talk to JavaScript. Now, you're going to love how complicated the report viewer control actually is. Div, let's give it an ID of report-viewer. Remember I said that we can look up an item on a page based upon its ID? Well, there you go. There's the ID of that object. And we're going to give it a style. Yes, this is inline CSS. I'm not a fan of it, but it is great for doing stuff quick. If we want to get more into CSS and have to make sure you understood how cascading style sheets worked and how applying to classes versus IDs worked, and let's not go there. I have a whole course on that. If you want to learn more about web development, I have a full course on it that will teach you everything you need to know about HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. But in the meantime, height, 100 view height. That's the entire report viewer control. You may say, Tim, I kind of understand what HTML is, and I can see that's just HTML and a little bit of inline CSS styling. So where is the actual control? Well, remember I said that we're going to call that JavaScript interop, which looks for an element ID and then sticks a bold report viewer in it? That's what's going to happen. So we don't actually have anything on the page. We just have a div we can then stick a report viewer inside. I have made the height 100 VH, which means 100% of the view height, or the full height of the page when it's loaded full screen. Okay. Inside the code section, report options. Let's call it viewer options equals new. I love the autocomplete sometimes. New. How about that? There we go. Public async void render report viewer. Inside here, viewer options dot report name. Now we're going to give it the name right in the code. If you're only showing one report, that's fine. If you're swapping out the reports, then you might want to have a picker, like a drop down or something like that. Or you might want to put it in your app settings.json if it's something you want to have one report for now, but maybe change it out later, something like that. But for us, we're just going to show one report for all time. So sample people report. Remember, don't add the RDL because that'll get appended for us. So that's the report name is sample people report. That's this right here. And then viewer options dot service URL equals, this is the path to our API, which I believe we call report. Let me make sure that. Let's go over to our API. And yes, report controller. So the controller name is everything before controller. So if I said report fun time, then the name of the controller is report fun time. So you don't add the controller in the end. But in our case, it's just report. All right. So we're going to call the API /report. And then we're going to await JS runtime dot invoke void async. So this is going to call our JavaScript runtime. It's invoking a void async, meaning it's going to call us asynchronously, but it's going to not expect anything back from the function we're calling. So we're calling a JavaScript function, and we're saying nothing's coming back, but I still want to call us asynchronously. So normally we don't do asynchronous calls that have a void. We use task, but we're calling into JavaScript. We're stepping outside of the realm of C#. So we're invoking a method. What is that method? Bold reports dot render viewer. Where'd that name come from? Bold reports render viewer. So bold reports dot render viewer. So if you want to change the names, cool, go for it. Change this name to Tim is cool, and then this would be Tim is cool dot render viewer. Up to you. Next up, report viewer. What's that? That is the ID on our page. Report-viewer. So that's the link right there. And then finally, viewer options. What is that? That's our model that we filled in with some settings information, mainly report name and URL of the API. So these two pieces of information right there, element ID, that's this right here, report viewer, and then report viewer options, which is I called viewer options. So that's the information being passed in. Now, what will happen here is this will get serialized into JSON to then get passed through to here, which is why it's the lowercase r and lowercase s. And we can read off of the report viewer options and put it into these two values. So that's how that connection works. We're calling this function in JavaScript from C#. And we're doing so not expecting a return. It will just work on this object and happen to put our report there. We do need a protected override void on after render. And we'll get rid of the base call and just say render report viewer, which is calling this method. So this is, and actually we should do a, since this is not asynchronous, we're just going to call it directly. Not a huge fan, but is what it is right here. So we're going to await it here, but then down here we're not awaiting it, but it's returning a void. So it's kind of going off into the mist. But that's how we're going to make that call. Okay, I think that is all there is to it, but we're going to find out. This is the fun part. We're going to hit build, and first of all, see if it builds. Always a question mark when you're doing a lot of changes. Now let's hit run and see if it runs, because it did build. And so far it's running, cool, but we haven't actually rendered the page yet. Let's go to report viewer and see if it works. All right, so unable to read value from request body, add from body attribute to the call. We did miss one thing in the API. Let's go over to, where is the API? Right here. Okay, so this right here, the JSON result, this comes from the body of the call. Therefore, we have to add from body to let it know that's where it's coming from, as opposed to from somewhere else. So it's coming from the body, not from a form or something else. Let's try it again and see if this time it works. Report viewer. Wait for it. Hey, there we go. So we have our sample report, we have our logo, we have our data. Notice it's all kind of crunched on the sides. That's because this is the report view as opposed to the print layout view. There's the print layout view. We do get the license not registered. We covered this in a couple of videos ago where we talked about adding our license key in the secrets.json file so you can see that without the message. We can do that. We can also export this. We can export it to PDF. And by doing so, we can hit open, and there's our report exported to PDF. We actually have 2 pages instead of just one. I could trim that up if you wanted to, but this works. So that's our sample report. I won't take this off because, again, we covered that 2 videos ago when we talked about setting up our PDF viewer. We covered making sure that you have a license and you have it licensed in your project. But that is how you put a report viewer on your Blazor server site. You can do the same thing with MVC or Razor pages because it's pretty much the same thing already. It's just how the page, all this code is pretty much the same except for where we call this. That's the only thing that really changes. Otherwise, this code is pretty much the same everywhere when it comes to our page. So with that, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. Thanks for Syncfusion for sponsoring these. Thanks for Syncfusion for sponsoring the community with all the stuff they give away for free. I really appreciate how much of a friend they are to the community, and even more so now. And I will get back to you later once we have sponsored those. We're going to take some sponsorship money. If you haven't watched the first video, watch that. But we're going to take about $7,000 from this sponsorship and use it to help other groups that are learning code and are trying to figure out how this all works. We're going to try and sponsor them because of the fact that we've been sponsored, and we want to kind of pass that along. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.